Hi everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Sound of AI Conversations. In this session, I'm going to have a chat with Jae Mitchell, who's the CEO and founder at Boomy, which is a generative music company that's doing very, very interesting things. And you'll learn about Boomy and about a lot of things about AI music directly from Alex, who's a great business person and entrepreneur, as you'll hear in a second. So first of all, thank you very much, Alex, for being here.
Thank you, Valeria, and flattery will get you everywhere with me. So keep that up.
Cool, great. So yeah, let's get started with something like super straightforward. So what's your background, Alex?
Yeah, sure. My background. I'm a musician. I'm still a musician. I was a violin player, so I was a classically trained violinist from a sort of ridiculously young age. Went electric, so to speak, when I became a teenager and started getting really sick playing Bach all the time, and that was. I mean, that's kind of where a lot of this started. I had electric violins, and you could put them into, effects and pedals and change the sounds and do all sorts of stuff. And, if you think about it, like a pedal effects chain is pretty much just an algorithm, right? Yeah. Maybe a pre-built components. I had like YouTube virality in the very early days of YouTube. So I think those videos are still up. They're like 20 years old now, but they're still somewhere. Where that led to a record deal, led to like being able to play internationally and in awesome venues like Kennedy Center and Carnegie Hall and like just really cool places. And then went industry in my 20s in music tech, and so I spent the last 10 years or so in music tech as a consultant and starting companies in the space. And I've just been a music tech guy for a long time, and now I'm doing Boomy.
That's super cool. I didn't know about your career as a musician, like with all of that like success behind you. So yeah.
Yeah, I know. Nobody remembers that anymore. Well, because it was a long time ago. Okay. And I was a kid. I was a child, basically.
Right.
And I guess if there's anything that's applicable to today, creatively, obviously, but on the business side, it was that being on YouTube and having, back then hundreds of thousands or close to 1 million, I think, which back then was like a lot, right? Now it's like, who cares? But back then, in the early 2000s, that was kind of insane. And for many years, if you Googled electric violin, that video was like the first thing that came up on Google. And so it was like hundreds, probably thousands of like emails from people all over the world, basically saying like, oh my God, like your music is inspiring me, or I'm a violinist too, and how did you play this, and can I get the sheet music, and all this crazy stuff. And it was like, wow, there's this huge world out there of musicians, of people who want to engage with music, and a lot more than people might expect. So yeah, it feels like a really long time ago, but that's where all this started.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. And what I wanted to know next is actually, so how did you decide to move towards music tech and more specifically towards artificial intelligence, right? And combining artificial intelligence with your passion for music.
Yeah. So to bridge it, so I moved to New York. I played in probably over a dozen bands. I was an active busker, right? So I would like play violin on the street and hope somebody dropped in a dollar. And then those dollars were few and far between. Wanted to find a career, right, that would be interesting, and got really interested in the music industry, right, and how the music industry worked, and talked to my manager about what's behind you, what's behind a label, what's behind all this stuff. And so the first company I started was a A&R research company. And so we were a product that was used by, it's called Audiokite. We were used by a lot of independent musicians, but also, big music companies, here and there, and media companies, where basically we could try to figure out if a song was good by playing it for people and asking them if it was good or not, and then putting all that data and shipping those data reports. And so by the time, and so I built that company for several years. We sold it in 2016 to a company called River Nation. And then we kept running it sort of internally there. I think it actually exists as a BandLab product now. But anyway, while I was doing that, we I interacted with a bunch of people who were using it not just as musicians but as like AI musicians, right?
Right.
There was this and startups, and I met a couple of the early founders behind some of the early AI music companies, and it was just so interesting, right? I remember seeing some of these early experiments and some of these early methodologies, and it was being used on our platform to say like, hey, here's what people say about human music, or music that our customers would create, and here's what it says about your algorithm's output, and it was being used that way. And so I just leaned in. I think probably because of that performance background, it was just so interesting, and I got really deep into it. I read a bunch. I took a bunch of classes, like and online courses, just in AI, and figuring out like how does this work and where does this come from? What are the different issues? And then when that I guess when my time at the company that bought our company expired, it was like, well, I want to do something next, right? I want to do something new. Let's dive into AI music, or this field, but in a different angle, right? Because the other thing that I saw, and happy to go more into this on the industry side, was just this growth in streaming, right? It was obvious to anybody who was watching the music distribution space, and especially this Goldman Sachs report that came out, I want to say 2015, I think, or 2016, where it was showing like, hey, global streaming music adoption is just going to create this wave of money, right? And we're living in that wave now. But back then, like 5 to 7 years ago, it was less obvious, right? I think that future was actually going to come true. And what I saw was an opportunity to connect, let's call it music automation, right, of which AI is one piece, to that growth, right, to the growth in streaming, because the use cases for AI that I was seeing at the time were like, hey, we can do music for videos, or we can do music for film and TV, or assist composers. My view is always, well, what if you could make anybody a musician, right? And so that's really where Boomy came from. It was that joy that I got to experience, right, when I was in high school, and when I was performing, and when I was playing in college in New York. It's really fun to be a musician. That's like a thing that people like to do. It's fun to release music. Getting a royalty check is like one of the coolest feelings in the world, because you're like, wow, somebody out there actually cared. And looking at this AI and what it could do led to this thought that, well, why do I get to do that, right? Well, it's because I had education, right? I went in my public school, had a great orchestra program, right? Actually, very few public schools have great orchestra programs. Very few people in the world, if you tally up all the people in the world, actually ever have an opportunity to even think about creating music, let alone actually doing it, let alone making money from it. And so we created Boomy under that idea, right? Of like, well, what if you could do the iPhone camera but for music, and then tie it into the global rights system so that people can make money from it. That idea has taken us on this kind of like crazy ride that is still like, seems like it's like the roller coaster part on the way down, but it's still very much on the roller coaster part on the way up.
Right. Wait, don't you just describe a little bit about Boomy? So what is Boomy, right? So what can you do with Boomy? What are like the different, the main products and the different features that you provide to music creators?
Yeah, sure. So Boomy, in terms of the, I'll simplify it to what the product is, right? Which is a product that anybody can access at boomy.com, right? You don't even need any specific device or download an app. It's literally just web-based for now. And anybody can go on this thing anywhere in the world. They can create songs near instantly, right? It takes about 15 to 20 seconds for the system to create songs that people can then change and edit and merge and then release right out into the world. So let's say you're somebody who has a TikTok channel or has a YouTube channel and wants to monetize it, or maybe you're just like some random person who wants to create a meme about a cryptocurrency or whatever. You don't know how to make music. You go to Boomy. You can go to our custom mode. You can say, I want, this production style I want it to kind of sound like Toronto. I kind of want to sound like trap, with this tempo and these kinds of densities and the different voices. And then you press go. And then when you press go, our audio engine basically will just start generating an unlimited number of wholly original, right, fully produced works and recordings. So it is it's creating a composition. It's creating at the direction of the user, it creates a composition and creates the sounds and all the different effects and everything that you would need for the song. And then it presents it to the user and says, hey, what do you think about this? And the user says, nope, that sounds like crap. I don't like it. And so they reject and reject and reject. Eventually, when it gets closer to what the person wants, they can save that song. They can add their voice to it. We have weird auto vocal features where you can just like speak, or in some cases scream, as many of our users like to do, into a microphone. Our systems will try to write that right across like a top line. And same kind of feature like, hey, algorithm did this, do you like it? Algorithm did that, do you like it? And then once you have something you like, you can go over to our release function, create some cover art for it, type in a name, make up a name for it, make up a little artist persona, and then we'll ship it out to all 48 major streaming services throughout the world and start monetizing it, right? So in a few days, you'll see that on Spotify, Apple Music, everywhere. And then as it gets streamed, right, we collect those royalties and we pass an 80% revenue share on to you as the user. And so that's game changing, right? Because what that means is you have a financial incentive, right, to use Boomy, to use it in your content, to tell your friends about it, to put it in your videos, and then we keep the platform totally free by taking a 20% revenue share on the money that we collect. And so that's basically the model, right? It allows people to express themselves with music, even if they don't know anything about making music, but also make money, right, from that activity. So that's the Boomy premise in a nutshell.
Yeah. That's great. That's a great summary, really, a great overview. So I was thinking about the level of. So you said that when you guys have a creator who's creating with Boomy, so the creator can decide whether to accept a certain piece of music or certain part of the music, right, or to reject that. But at the same time, I was curious to know how much is in the hands of the creator. So how much can he or she decide? So for example, do you have high level descriptors for the music? Like for example, emotional tags that the users can use to sort of influence the composition, the automatic composition, or do you even go a step lower towards the music theory, for example, providing them with information about, I don't know, something like it could be the overall like density of the melody or the type of structure or the form of the compositions that the AI actually produces. So how did you solve that?
Yeah, and it's interesting, especially for this audience, that I would actually separate out our engine capabilities, right, and sort of what the technology that we're building in-house does from what the app, right, and the users can control, right? Because those are sort of the two pieces that we're constantly building, and what the engine can do and what we're designing it for is always maybe a little bit ahead, right, of the features we've been able to launch and the interface we've been able to launch to users. So today we organize it by genre, right? Mostly the top level is genre. And there are moods, and there is an ability to affect mood on the engine side. What we've done is we have, let's call it, simplified those into presets, right? So like if you go and make lo-fi and you pick like rainy nights, like that's going to be more minor key, a little bit sadder, right? Whatever. Or you could go into our custom mode and set some of those parameters. But consider that our approach is very different from some of the other AI music tools out there, because we aren't really for musicians, right? In fact, what we do is challenge the idea of like, what is a musician in some sense? Because consider that 85% of our users, right, tell us it's the first time they've ever made music. So first-time music makers, right, the word composition in production trips them up, and we're still trying to figure that one out, right? We're trying to say like composition is the notes of a song and production is the sounds, but you lose like 35 to 40% of non-musical people when they're like, I'm sorry, notes and like what's a like we have all this knowledge, right? We have all this stuff that we bring to the table, and so we're constantly in this push and pull between how much of it, taste wise is coming from us and our team and sort of our industry input and the assumptions that go into the what we call like the bass, the bass composition or the bass line song, right, that's kind of delivered to you, and how much should the user be able to control that from the beginning, and then how much should they be able to change it, right? And so we have a lot of different types of users. We have users who don't really edit, but do evaluate like crazy, meaning they'll put the same things in and then they'll run like 150 different tracks just to pick one and then keep that one, maybe make a slight edit to it and then, release it, versus users who will create the first or second track and say, I can get this close, and then they spend 10 hours editing it, right? So what we're simultaneously asked by our users for, like, I want to work less and make this thing faster and better on the first spin, and also we want to work more. We want more editing capabilities and more effects and all that stuff. And so, we've been building in public, right? We've been around with this product for about 2 years, and as a company, maybe about 2.5 years. And as we are looking ahead, like if we can fast forward towards the end of this year especially, a lot of what you're going to see from us is more editing capabilities, the ability to go in and change different effects, affect mood, affect all these different things, right? And the only reason why it's not out there today is because we're developing the engine, right, in it, and there's a lot of really cool features of this engine that we're super proud of, alongside an application that's being used by hundreds of thousands of people, which has its own complexity, right? So there, it's a long answer because today, right, we have kind of answered that, well, most people don't really know about music who are using Boomy, obviously, because then they would just make music some other way. So, if we say, well, this is like a melancholy mood in like a, this genre at this BPM and this tempo with these composition features and those production features, that's like, what? Like, people don't know what we're talking about. Versus it's like rainy nights, trap, go. And that translates into something that our user base can kind of understand. So I think for the future for us is I think of it like Instagram. On Instagram, you can take that photo, that camera is doing a lot of the work for you, right? And then you can go in and you can make edits and you can change aspects of the photo. That's what you're going to see from Boomy, right? You're going to see the best possible first spin that we can give you based on the inputs that the user is assigned or based on the preset that we've designed, and then invite you to say, like, well, if there's anything that you want to change about this, right, you can go in, you can regenerate sections, you can change your own effects, and then release it in one click.
Right, yeah. That's super interesting, and somehow it aligns to the work that I was doing when I was with my startup Melodrive, right? In our case, we were focusing more on video game music, but there was this idea of providing flexibility if necessary, but if not necessary, to have this sort of presets and then going with a sort of initial generation that works like for the majority of non-musical people, right? That who didn't have or doesn't have any music theory background or compositional background, right? But sure. So I was curious to know your take on this point because I think it's very central. So in my experience in generative music, I encountered all sorts of musicians and talked to them very extensively about what it means to be a musician, what it means to be a composer today, right? And I was curious to know whether you think that the advent of AI in terms of like producing music and composing music is going to change the way we think of a composer right now. And I'm going to add a little extra question on top of that, and how that will be factored in by a company like Boomy.
Yeah. It's so what comes to mind is, so my better half, she works in art, in art conservation. She's a conservator, but specifically for sculpture. And so when I hang out with her and her friends, there was one time that we went to this museum and we're looking at all these paintings, right? And they're like art people. I'm not really an art person. And they were like, well, this picture, blah, 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 X, Y, and Z, and that picture. And then they were like, we're going through and they're talking about pictures. And so eventually I turned to her and I was like, why are they calling these paintings pictures? Like, that doesn't make it, it's a painting, not a picture, right? And so she smiled and she explained to me that, well, they are pictures, right? Paint me a like back before photography, right? The way you would achieve a picture is by painting one, right? Literally paint me a picture. And that's because they had no alternative, right? For what that meant. Photography comes about, right? And after photography, there were so many more pictures, right? That now when you say picture, you don't think intuitively of a painting, you think of a picture that somebody took with a camera. So I think the semantics of musician and composer and producer and all this stuff, right, is going to change. Maybe not because of AI or because of anything that we're doing or that you're doing or that our field does, but just because of the nature of how music automation has progressed over time, right? So like one question being like, I don't want to get like into a debate about this necessarily, but just as a thought exercise, not that I have a view on it, is Drake a singer, right? Or is somebody who is like a trap musician who is, adding vocals to a song, but primarily through autotune, right? Like, is that person a singer? Well, we call them a vocalist, right? Some people would say, yeah, they're singing, right? But they're singing through autotune, and that's what's coming out of it. But so many of these terms, right? As music automation as a whole moves forward, not just AI, but all of the different technologies that are making production a lot easier, that are making mastering a lot easier. As audio technology just develops in general, like Apple lossless in Apple spatial audio on Apple Music in AirPods it's insane. I'm a purist, right? I'm one of those like I love the vinyl record guys, and so in theory I should hate this, but I can't deny what my ears are saying, which is that like that technology sounds really, really good for reasons that are probably above my understanding. And so is Apple now a mastering, right? Is Apple and Dolby, so there's been a master, but then there's this other layer. So there's all these terms, and I think these terms are so rooted in a classical education, and these terms are just going to change, right? And so what does it mean to be a musician? What does it mean to be an artist? What does it mean to be a producer or a composer or whatever? I think that's going to have a personal meaning to anybody who identifies themselves as that. There are people who use Boomy who absolutely consider themselves composers and musicians and whatever. There are people who use Boomy who don't consider themselves that at all. They just want a song for their podcast or whatever. And the question of like, well, technically speaking, right, and mechanically speaking, like Boomy is an artist, right? We're musicians. We're songwriters. We are, as a team, a songwriting and production team, right, that's creating systems, inviting the world to use those systems, and then also being the label and paying them out when they use our systems for things that are good or that are consumed, right? So yeah, a lot of these things just get up in the air. Obviously, I have a very biased perspective on it, and I don't frankly think I'm the one to even answer that question in a non-personal way, right? From this like, what is a composer, right? Or it's a person who writes notes. Okay, well then is like, if my dog walks over a piece of paper and happens to write some notes down on a sheet, like, well, that's not copyrightable. He's not an author. If you have an AI system that's designed by a person, there's all these things that just stop making sense. So it's a great question. I wouldn't even take my views on it that seriously because of how biased I am on it. What it means for Boomy, though, is that, again, AI versus automation. Like, we're a music automation company. One of the things that sets Boomy apart is that we have, like taste built into our algorithms, built into the way we're selecting and designing these systems, and we do that with composers, right? We do that with producers. There is humanness like all over this thing, right? Both in terms of how we design it and how our users take it and change it and consume it in different ways. So I don't have a great answer. I only have more questions, and I think that there's going to be a lot of discussion about what that means in the future. But again, I would just take it away from like, well, how does AI change this, to like, well, this has been happening for 20, 30, 40 years now, arguably starting with like Brian Eno and like Laurie Anderson and like some of these like, experimental musicians after synthesizers became a thing. There's so much that just doesn't make any sense anymore with these terms. So do we need new terms? Do those terms change? I don't know, but I just keep thinking about the fact that art people call paintings pictures, and the rest of us are sort of like calling it something else now. I think you're going to see similar stuff start to happen with music.
Yeah.
As those barriers go down.
Yeah, I totally agree with your take there. And in my case, I would say that it's not really about artificial intelligence per se. It's more the advancement of technology and automation. And the fact that this is not just the history of digital music, but this is the history of music throughout human civilization. And even before that, even in prehistoric times, probably we started composing music or creating music through the only means that we had at the time, which was our voice, right? Producing music using our own instrument. But then we offloaded the production of music to other instruments. It could be a bone flute, it could be some sort of like percussive instrument. And then the history of music, at least for me, it's a history of expanding expressive possibilities and facilitating the act of music creation itself, in a sense, right?
For sure.
So, and
yeah, absolutely.
The more we move towards, for example, the 19th and the 20th century, right? So the more we have more technology that initially could be just some sort of like acoustic technology, but technology nonetheless. The violin that you play is an incredible piece of technology beyond being like a facilitator for incredible like music to be created and performed on, right? But then we arrive at the point of digital music, and then all of a sudden the barrier of entry to music creation just goes down. Having a DAW today allows you to create things that 40, 50 years ago were just utterly impossible, even in the, I don't know, like among the best bands and the biggest bands around, like Pink Floyd or, I don't know, Beatles. Right?
Sure.
And then comes artificial intelligence. That's just an extra step towards the facilitation, right? But I usually get a big objection at this point in this sort of train of thought, and especially from more conservative composers, musicians, right? Who say, yeah, but you are making music making so easy right now that we just lose the reason of having a composer, musician who studied, I don't know, for how many years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, right? And now you're just making everything so simple that we are losing authenticity. We are losing what it really makes and what it really means to make music, right? So being there like with a pencil for some.
Yeah. Well, not sorry to interrupt, but because I hear that perspective too, and I have two thoughts on it. I mean, one, you can draw a purity line anywhere you want, right? I'm a violinist, and I remember the first time I play guitar too, because after you learn how to play violin, guitar is like cheating. I remember playing a guitar for the first time and being like, I'm sorry, there's a 1-inch space with a fret that as long as the guitar is in tune, I can just hit anywhere in that. And then it's like that's ridiculous. That's not like I came up in classical music culture, right? I think you did too, right? Because you studied in maybe more on the composition than performance side. But in that culture, like as you know, people will draw purity lines at like, well, guitar is stupid because like that's not even a real instrument. So wherever someone's individual purity line is drawn, right? Um, they're absolutely entitled to that opinion, and probably if I was still performing, or if I was 15 years ago and I saw some of these things, I might have the same view. So it's a view that I completely respect. But I would point out that like just because like what musical expression has stopped because Boomy exists now, or because some of these technologies exist now? The answer is nothing. Like, did we stop appreciating great singers after Autotune? The answer is, of course we didn't. Did we stop? The market is growing so quickly and in so many different territories and in such a way that like no, it's almost hard to comprehend. That the market for consumption, the market for music creation, this is just an innate human thing. People are going to make music in all sorts of different ways, and this is one of them, right? So I think there's this weird like feeling where you're like, wait a minute, like is this going to impact what I do? But if you're a musician who's afraid of that AI is going to replace what you do, I would just say don't make that kind of like I want to be careful with how I say this. If you're a musician who's threatened by AI, it probably means that what you're doing if what you're making could be done with an AI, like step back and ask yourself whether or not that's the right kind of music to be making, right? Because there's music, we've never been in a more amazing time for music across the board. There's all sorts of interesting stuff being made in all sorts of ways that have nothing to do with AI at all. And then over and over again, what we see is artists, really creative artists and really brilliant people taking technologies, including Boomy's technology, and doing what they do, doing what artists do, changing it, manipulating it, making it their own, regardless of sort of where it came from. And look, at the same time, it's not an awesome time to be a classical musician. Many of my friends, right, some of my close friends in the world, stayed in that field. They continue to be performing artists, and I've sat and watched them in symphonies where like half the freaking venue is in this beautiful concert hall is empty because there just isn't as much of a market interest for that kind of music. So ultimately, musicians, we can draw purity lines wherever we want. I'll respect anyone's anywhere because I totally get it. But maybe the thing that we as musicians don't want to admit to ourselves sometimes is that ultimately what music is consumed is not driven. Well, we could actually debate this. My belief is that it's not so much driven by what musicians are doing, so much as it is being driven by what people are consuming. So if people want to listen to the thing, more of that thing is probably going to happen. If people want to listen to AI music, or if people want to listen to music that they've created with Boomy, and if one of those reasons is because they made it, or because they made it about something they care about, this is the main driver of Boomy's thing. Like, it's people making songs for somebody else, for their fiance, for their kids, or with their kids, right? About things that are meaningful to them. If that's a new consumption method, right, or a new reason to consume music, because I care about it, right, or because it's about something that I care about, then now we've tapped into something really, really powerful. Because ultimately, the way music is created is going to be influenced by how it's consumed. And again, I would just always encourage musicians and composers to respect how they were brought up and respect the musical traditions that they have, but keep an open mind, right? And don't look at AI or at Boomy and say like, oh no, that's something to be scared of. But try to understand it. Go use it. Go make a release with it and see if people like it. Like, be an art. Be open-minded, I guess, is what I would say to that person.
Cool. Yeah, very interesting take and very similar to mine as well, I would say. But you were talking about the possibilities that AI opens up, right, for musicians, for music creators at all levels, right? I was wondering, what's your take on the market for AI music right now? So do you see a market there? So that's definitely the first question. And if so, what's that type of market?
Well, yeah, definitely. I mean, but I have to pause on like AI music, right? I'm going to quibble. I'm going to quibble there just a little bit because again, I think AI music went from something that meant a lot of different things to meaning something that means something kind of specific, right? And when I think of AI music, I think of like Magenta, I think of like OpenAI, I think of like,
Right.
you know, AI as applied to ingesting lots of raw audio or MIDI
Mm-hmm.
training data or whatever, and then sort of like regurgitating best guess copies of it as that pertains to original composition, or in OpenAI's case, just this sort of magical ability to use feed to take in all this audio, raw audio, and then produce it in a way that's cool. Is there a market for that thing? Right. That's how I would caveat your question. Unknown. Right. We haven't seen massive market applications that are super interesting there that I've seen yet. Maybe that changes as the technology becomes a little more accessible, a little cheaper. But I haven't seen anything that shows me, hey, there's tons of money in those specific hills. But when it comes to music automation, right, and what's the music for? Let's call it algorithmic music, right, or music with aspects of automation in it. I think that's the biggest freaking market that exists in this whole space, and that's why I do what I do every day, right? Because and again, I think the market is shifting. So I think the market is shifting from early experiments, right, with AI music, like, hey, here's some tech, here's an industry, what can it do? We're now getting into this phase where I think there's starting to become a recognition that there are clear and obvious use cases for this stuff, right? So like sleep music and generative music for focus and background and all that stuff, most which is largely algorithmic, right? You got, I don't know, 10 apps, right? Many of which are very popular, that will do that thing. And there it is. There is an algorithmic music thing, right, out in a market with companies that have tons of investment and lots of users and millions of people consuming that, right? You've also got Boomy coming out right now in the market with tons of song assets on behalf of that we distribute on behalf of our users, starting to become a really significant, catalog, right, music catalog. In the global rights system. So that's kind of this obvious market case. I think you're starting to see some of those early ideas about, the gaming use case, right? Start to bubble up again now that live streaming is more adopted. There's more bandwidth in more places. So I've seen the market for AI music, I think, kind of go from this experimental phase, and this is what happens with markets, right? Where into something where there's sort of these solidified, like, okay, people want X, Y, and Z, but I think there's a lot of other letters in the alphabet to go after there, right? And so the way we think about that is building our engine in such a way that, if we wanted to create one of those apps that does generative, sleepy stuff, like, sure, we can do that. Our engine can produce, pretty much whatever for pretty much whatever market, and that's the way we think about it, right? Like, we're in this self-expression use case primarily today, but there's no reason why our technology can't go into a lot of other places. So I think the market for, let's call it AI-assisted or heavily automated music, or whatever we want to call it, AI music is fine as a catch-all term too. I think it's starting to develop. I wouldn't call it mature. I would still say it's pretty early innings, but we've gone from like, the homework assignment phase to like okay, like people are making money now phase. And then it becomes, well, what takes it supernova, right?
Cool.
And I think that's the question that all of us working in AI music on the entrepreneurship side are looking for.
Cool. Very interesting take. So I was wondering, just like bringing the conversation back to Boomy specifically. So what's your big vision for your company there? So what is the impact that you envision for Boomy to have onto the market in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I really think a lot. This stuff does not happen overnight, right? And the core principle of what we want to achieve, and what we do achieve now, which is, I'm a person. I have any device, even a $10 smartphone, anywhere in the world with any internet connection. I can create music that is as good as what's coming out of major record labels in 10 seconds. That is the vision. That is the thing that we're working towards, right? I call it like the iPhone 12 camera moment. Because right now, maybe Boomy's like iPhone 3G, right? Like it takes the camera, like it takes the photo, but like maybe not awesome in low light. Maybe it needs, it needs a little bit of work. It needs kind of the right parameters in order to get something really good. But the more users we get, the more data we ingest, the more we improve our systems, the more we take in, external feedback from industry, tastemakers and the like. The closer we're going to get to that point where, maybe I speak 5 sentences into a phone, and now now a system can produce music, on the level of what you would hear on the radio, like in your own voice, like with the latest sound, latest trend, whatever. And that's iPhone camera 12, right? Like look at what's happened with iPhone cameras over the last 15 years. It's incredible. These things it's low light. It's like they all look beautiful. Like everybody's this amazing photographer. 10 years from now, it'll probably be better than DSLRs, right? And so that's the progression that I think we can get to with music. And I just, I think that's good. And I think that's a good thing. I don't understand a counter argument, that says there's this special kind of person that should be a musician. I really think that everybody has this natural musical sense, right? Babies can sing and dance. It's part of what it means to be human. And if you can bring that to literally everybody in the world, right, with any access to any level of technology, the market changes significantly, sure. But you're following, a path that's been laid out by hundreds of years of thousands of years of evolution. To your point about the history of music from before. So that's our goal. That's our North Star. Our North Star is like with effort or with like whatever this minimal amount of humanity, I guess, right, can get you to the sound that you can imagine in your head without you having to go through those 20 years of training. More or less.
Yeah, very interesting. So you said something that picked my attention very much. So you said that in order to improve Boomy, of course, you're getting a lot of data, right? And then you're using that data to improve the sort of like generative models that you're building, right? Now, here I see a very central point of generative music or algorithmic music, right? However you want to call it. That is, how do we evaluate the systems that we build, right? Because we're not dealing with something objective, like, for example, I don't know,
exactly.
like, speech recognition, right? So there's a ground truth there, and there's a true right answer, like a correct answer and a wrong answer to just, I don't know, they're trying to process a certain sentence, right? But in the case of generative music, here you're dealing with something that's completely different. The material you're manipulating is different. Creating music, it's something extremely subjective, right? And now, what's good music for me may not be good music for you, right? So,
of course,
I'm really curious to know how you evaluate the music that gets produced. So do you take an approach that's sort of statistics based in a sense, right? So the average taste, and we go with that taste, or do you have something that's a little bit more expert or like expertise informed, if you want, right? So you have composers that or producers to tell you, yeah, this is good music, this is not really a great song, right? So yeah, please,
sure.
To hear.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely the right question too, because I think we had ideas in the beginning. This is maybe just like also like Startup 101, right? In the earliest days, the thought was, well, we can rely on save data, right? Meaning users who are saying like, yes, I like this, then good, that must be good, because you enumerated the problem precisely, right? Which is like, there's no objective good song. If there was, probably you would go and spend millions of dollars and build an algorithm that just creates the same Beatles song over and over again, right? Or something, right? Because you've tuned it to this, specific this specific goal. And that's where actually I saw some of the research and some of the stuff suffering, right? It's like if you narrow the output too much, it'll just kind of write the same song every time. So in the beginning, it was like, okay, well, check this out. If we can get enough people saying, giving us indicators on which of our features are good and which of our features are bad in any particular output, and then also tie that into commercial performance, right? Well, then, hooray! You have a wholly data-driven approach to be able to develop personalized models and genre-based models, and something new, right? Whatever that new thing is that there isn't a word for yet, right? Which is some algorithmically brilliant output that will eventually come out of something like this. Well, of course, what do we find, right? What we find is that turns out, especially first-time music makers, don't always know what sounds good, right? Sometimes they would love and create songs, and people still will. That personally, I don't find the most listenable or the most wonderful, but they love it, right? For whatever reason. Also, we found that commercial performance to how something sounds, like, that's only one aspect of it. It's like, oh, this got on a playlist and that's why it got tons of plays, right? Was there something about the compositional features and the sound features of that song, or is it just because it got on the playlist? Like, so taking a wholly data, we still take that thinking into account, but taking a wholly data driven approach, right? And that statistical approach that you're talking about, I think will get you somewhere, but I think it's only going to get you so far. And so what we have today and what we're building towards is that second thing, right? We've got an A&R team. We've got really, really brilliant people on the team at Boomy who are music and let's say A&R, like the same kind of people you would see in a record label, right? Who are listening to essentially all, or as much as we can get to, of the music that's being produced by users, right? And picking out the stuff that's cool. And you can go to boomy.com on our homepage and see some of the playlists of things that our A&R team is picking up as being particularly interesting or musically interesting. And so we need that human curation level to say, hey, like, there's something about this track, there's something about that track. And over time, right, I think we're at like 6 million tracks that people have made today. Over time, I think those statistical approaches will be helpful, but perhaps they're helpful mostly in the context of what human tastemakers and human curators have pulled out. And so I think the perfect model probably looks something like a statistical approach, the basis of which is both just raw data and A&Rs and people who are close to the ground on culture, right? And what people like to listen to, plus the traditional composers and producers and tastemakers who are kind of informing the algorithm design in the first place. It's probably some combination of those things, right? And what we've done today is combinations of those things. Boomy we're not perfect, right? We haven't figured out the perfect answer to this thing. But what I can say from the ground is that probably a wholly statistical approach, again, is only going to get you so far. We have a huge amount of data, and we're, to the extent that that's going to drive improvements, you just have to be able to trust your data, and that is not always possible, right? Especially in a rapidly evolving sense that we have today.
Yeah, I think one of the risks that you have there with using a statistical only approach is that you're basically feeding to people more of what they already like, in a sense, right? So the risk is that you're basically constraining yourself to whatever people already likes, right? So, and I think like that there's a risk there, because the risk is that you're not going to explore other types of music, other like musical regions that are still unexplored, but could actually be interesting for many people, right? And
sure.
Yeah, I definitely see that as a risk. It's a little bit of a process of echo chamber, if you will, right? So I like this type of music. I give the algorithm this type of feedback that I like this type of music, and then I'm going to get more of that. And this is also like what happens all the time with music recommendation systems, right? And I don't know if you're a Spotify user, but I'm quite dissatisfied with their recommendations, because most of the time the user, it's extremely clear that they're using a sort of version of a collaborative filtering approach where everything is very, very data driven and based on other people's taste, right? And the risk is that you're going to end up in your bubble, and then it's going to be difficult to get out of that bubble. And in a sense, like this music recommendation system and this type of algorithmic or like data-driven, really, music taste for generative music algorithms are similar in the sense that they can just lock you within a certain sub-region, a subspace of the overall music space, and they don't allow you to explore potentially very interesting regions.
You're absolutely right, and this is why I caveat, AI music, right, with what Boomy does. I tend to always try to correct people to say it's not like we say make music with AI because it's the easiest way to understand where a song's coming from, especially for a user who's never made music before. But I wouldn't call what Boomy produces AI music necessarily, right? Because we have all these interventions, because it's not a traditional black box, trained model that we're sampling all the time, right? For outputs, it's a very different system. And I have to plug here. I feel compelled to plug, something that we're working on with this next version of the engine that's coming out this year, which is making it a lot more modular, a lot more interoperable, where we can start doing things like saying, hey, like, do you have an interesting algorithm that does not take in copyrighted training data, that produces melody if given a set of chords? If so, plug in, right? Plug into our music engine. Like, we built a lot of those too. You built one. Someone, people all over the world are building these things. Let's have a system where you can plug in and then be as far as cut into the royalties of what gets produced with that, right? Figuring out how to financially remunerate algorithmic artists is like a huge part of what I think about every day, right? Because if you can create the financial incentive, and if you can create if you can align the financial incentive with what you're trying to achieve, in our case, how do we stay ahead of it? Maybe we make the perfect EDM for 2022, and then like the whole culture moves away from what we can do, right? How do we stay ahead, right, of what people want to make? And I think the answer to that is, well, you have to have this collaborative approach. It has to extend beyond just the people who sit in as employees, as at Boomy. And so, I'm getting a little ahead of myself here, but part of our ambitions, right, and maybe this is part of your vision question from before, is creating a system that is easily that changes easily, right? Because that's the other problem with AI. You can spend tons of money and walk down a path and then have this gigantic model that you're stuck with, right? And you have to use this model because you invested so much in creating it. And then if you want to change it, or then if it starts doing something that you don't like it, or you don't want to, and you're building all these things to overfit or change, that's going to get you to a place where you just have to burn tons and tons of cash, right, in order to try to get to where you want to go, versus a system that we're building, which is all about being as affordable as possible to run, so that we can power a free service and invite basically the world of algorithmic creators to participate. And so that's the next step for us. It's like, if we're bringing the barrier to entry to creating music in a basic way, down to zero for our users. Well, what does that look like for people who are creating algorithms? Can they plug in? Can we be sort of that source for this, what I see as a new generation of artists coming up? That's the kind of stuff that gets me really excited. And so anyway, I don't know where our question started, but I just had to plug that because, especially for this audience, that's something that you're going to be hearing a lot from us about, especially later this year, early next.
Yeah. That's a great answer, and it totally aligns with my vision about AI music and the way like it should move ahead. This idea of modularity is extremely important because you want to have a system that allows you to swap different generators, as well as to try to follow a kind of divide and conquer approach, right? Where you don't have this gigantic machine learning or deep learning model that does everything, but rather trying to I don't know, like divide all the compositional production tasks into different subtasks and then have different generators for each of these tasks, right? In a sort of like tree-like fashion, if you will, right? And I think this is extremely interesting because there isn't a single DL model, deep learning model that can fit all the AI music needs out there, right? So you have to use different things depending on the need, depending on the genre, depending on the type of emotion and the type of level of flexibility and manipulation that you want to provide to the user with regard to the creation of the music itself. And in that respect, I have a question for you, which is, do you see Boomy moving towards a more, I would say, like a deeper kind of interface, so that even more competent, in a traditional way or traditional sense, musician can actually use Boomy and take the most out of it because they have a quite advanced way of manipulating what comes out of the algorithm?
Yeah, that's an internal question that we talk about every product meeting, right? Which is, and I kind of bring it back to, again, what's our place in the world, right? Like, who are we here for, and what do they want to do? Digital audio workstations exist. Digital audio workstations exist for free. Digital audio workstations exist for free on web in the form of BandLab, right? If you're somebody who natively understands like what a cello is and how to mix and how to master and how to produce, there's a whole world of that stuff, including really cool automated VSTs like Arcade and like I just saw a new one from I can't remember what it's called, but there's this new one from Native Instruments that looks awesome. If you're somebody who has those skills, right, like that world exists, and the question is, well, how much is Boomy relevant in that side of things for people who would call themselves musicians and producers and creators? Because those people show up to Boomy too, right? Those people tend to want to take it off of the platform. They want to make their own music with it, right? We have a whole team that's set up that works with artists, and we have amazing artist partnerships. God, I wish I could use some of the names already, but I can't. Where it's artists who are using Boomy coming to us, some relatively decently big names, and saying like, hey, I want to use this to like produce like my next hit, because I like certain aspects of what's going on here, but I want stems, I want to change it, I want X, Y, and Z. And so in that case, we kind of treat that separately. How much of that gets built into the product versus how much of that is supported by the company, as a record label and as a publisher, I see us kind of doing both, right? Because we have this concept of graduation, right? People graduate off of Boomy. People will write in saying like, hey, I want to do X, Y, and Z thing. Like, I want to be able to change the vocal around, or I want to be able to change the effects. Obviously, we're building those, editing capabilities as fast as we can. But in the meantime, we don't want to prevent anybody from, making music, right? Yeah. And so in those cases, we'll work with artists and we'll have artist partnerships and we'll figure it out. Where I see us going, in a perfect world is basically being able to give the non, like, I don't know what a digital audio workstation is, nor do I care to know, that person enough capabilities where they can get to a point where somebody who does have that knowledge, right, and we can create their own music with it at a very high quality. But I think what we don't want to be, or at least the current thinking within the company, because it could change, is a less functional digital audio workstation, right? That's not really the part of the world that we want to be in. We want to be in instant or near instant music that's the shortest possible distance between your inspiration and having something out in the market. And we're going to create editing tools because that's what people are asking for. But yeah, we have this question and it's hanging over us of like, well, then when do you just become a digital audio workstation? And when do you become, something else? So that's a good question. And it's something that we're looking at. I think what we need to do now, especially considering how much We've invested in the just rights management side of what we do, right, as well as the music creation part of what we do. There are complicated rights reasons, right, that we may not want to create a digital audio workstation capability within Boomy, right? It makes our catalog a little bit harder to manage for things like copyright and things like the market that we're in. So it's a good question, and what I can say is the current thinking is no, we don't want to be a digital audio workstation in your browser. We want to be something closer to what we are today, but eventually you get enough editing tools, and what's the difference? So it's a good question. It's a good question, and watch this product evolve. Like there's so much coming. It's really, really cool stuff that's on the way. It is not a finished product. It is being built by really talented people all the time, both in terms of the engine and in terms of the interface. It looks and sounds completely different than it did a year ago, completely different than a year before that. Where we're going to be next year, 3 years, 5 years is I'm just really excited to actualize it and listen to what people are making.
That's cool. Talking about the future, I'd like to finish off this interview with a question regarding the future, right? Or predictions about the future.
Sure.
So what do you think is going to happen in the AI music space, say, 5 years from now?
I don't know. I don't even know about any predictions anymore. Like 5 years ago, did you have pandemic and all the horrible things we're seeing now in Europe? And I have no idea what's going to happen in the next 5 years. A more intelligent answer. Yeah, I have no idea is the answer. A more intelligent answer. What's the difference? Well, yeah. What's the difference between today and 5 years from today in AI music? I think the answer is money, actually. I think it's money. I think there is big money that's going to come into this space. And I think that's going to change things, right? Because, and when I say big money, what I mean is like you've seen venture capital come into the AI music space. You've seen academic, funding come into this space, but there hasn't been like a giant PE fund, for example, or a billions and billions, right? Let me put it this way. How did we get to iPhone camera 12, right? It didn't just happen. It was, I don't know, back in napkin, 80 to 100 million maybe per year that Apple spent just on R&D and in salaries of all the people who worked on that camera for a decade, right? Maybe like over a billion, probably multiple billions if you count up the supply chain. Everybody involved, right? All the different people who touch like creating an iPhone camera 12 and getting you to that experience. That's billions and billions of dollars probably back in napkin. Not that I've done the math, but it's a huge amount of money, right? And we haven't seen that in AI music, partially because there's been, in my view, a lack of financial incentive for that kind of investment, right? Well, where are you going to make money on the other side? We're still early innings into the market and trying to figure it out. But one of the things that happened over the last several years in the music rights space is that big money came in, right? Big money bought the masters and publishing and different rights streams from, and you've got the Hypnosis, you've got KKR, you've got these gigantic PE funds buying music rights, looking at the music market and the music industry in this totally different way. And it's driving growth and thinking in a totally different way in a streaming market and a streaming music market that I would argue is still chaos. It's not settled, right? We don't know. Nobody has won the streaming wars. This is all very much in development. So when it comes to the AI piece of that, I think what you're going to see is now that the market is not anywhere close to mature, but starting to get to a point where it's obvious that there are consumer applications for this thing, the big money is going to wake up. And I think they're slowly but surely starting to wake up that there is something really, really significant in many of these theses, right? That have their core in music automation and AI music. And I mean, like, not just VC, but I guess if it's going to take $1 billion to get you to that point, right, where you're pressing that button and it sounds better than what you would hear on the radio, you have to have the right consortium of people, the right industry buy-in, and frankly the right sources of capital in order to support whatever technology is going to get there, and probably you need a lot of competition. Probably you need all the different things that the iPhone camera had to get there. Because why did they invest billions of dollars in the iPhone camera? Is it because people love photos? No, it's because it sold iPhones, right? It sold like one of the key drivers of like why people upgraded their phones was to get better cameras. They figured that out really fast, and then they said, okay, great, pour all the money into making great cameras. If that feature had happened to be something else, or if that feature, now that AI is making it possible, happens to be, making music in the same way, a lot of what I've done, you and I have talked about this before, a lot of what I'm trying to do is figure out what is that market incentive that's going to justify the investment to get there. I think it's worth investing in for creative reasons and personal creative reasons, and drawing creativity out of humanity reasons and all this fun fuzzy stuff. But without money, right, it's not going to get there. And so that's what I think is going to change this year to 5 years. I think you're going to see big money, or maybe medium money and then big money, wake up to the reality of what is going to happen in this space. What does 100 billion songs, per year look like, and how does that shift the market? Whoever's there first and whoever's doing that, the spoils on the other side of that thing are just going to be ridiculous. And so obviously that's why I'm driving Boomy as hard as we can, to be first there and to be part of that. But I think you need competition. I think you need big money. I think you need brilliant people like you and your community working on the hard technology problems with the right financial incentives in place. And when all of those things come together, that's when you have, the button next to the camera. That's the Make Music button. And the Make Music button changes a lot of things about the music industry, about how we communicate with each other. And that to me is just worth pushing for. It's worth working on. It's what we're doing at Boomy every day. And it's what I hope to grow, right, with great talent inside and outside of the company towards that future. So that's what I care about. That's where I think we're going to be in 5 years. I think 5 years from now, we're going to look back to now and be like, oh, duh, right? Of course, like now that AI or automated music or whatever, highly automated music has taken over so much of the market, and the big money that was right, today to bet on that, they're going to do really well. And so that's where I think, we're going to see the next 5 years go. Then if you get into like 10, 15, 20 years, I mean, who knows, man? Like there's probably a billion songs a day. Like that I am sure that the flood of content is just going to get people born into that will not see it as extreme, but people who remember the now will think that's an extreme future, right? Of billions of songs. And so look, I could be completely wrong, but that's what I think anyway.
That's a great take. So Alex, thank you so much for coming on the Sound of AI conversation.
I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, your insight has been incredible. Thank you very much, and good luck leading the charge in AI music with Boomy.
Appreciate that. Appreciate it, Blair. It means a lot.
Bye.